a very successful distraction from paying attention to the needs of the American people here. So all in all, with a soup-buying press asking questions of the Secretary of Defense, such as, only one aircraft carrier, Mr. Rumsfeld? Other probing questions will be left to satirical rendition later on. But you saw how the press went into lockstep, hired the retired generals and admirals sitting next to the anchors, providing the usual, rather superficial observations, and off we were, just like the 1991, which was a different kind of situation, to be sure, but still, there's something uneasy about major networks performing in this way and not allowing dissenting voices, and basically empirically starving the audience by becoming cheerleaders and focusing on what kind of weapons are used and what kind of tactics and how much the Air Force role will be compared to the armored divisions, as if this is one massive, intricate chess game rather than an entry into a very pretentious future of risk for the Islamic world and our own national security in that world. When you have that kind of politically advantageous cocktail of many inputs, you ask yourself, what could possibly stand up against it? Well, there were some diplomats who stood up. There were some retired intelligence officials. There was former Marine General Anthony Zinni, whose specialty was the Middle East. There was Admiral Shanahan, former head of the Pacific Fleet. There were some colonels. There were some non-coms who spoke up. All in all, probably this was the first war we ever were plunged into against the better judgment of perhaps a majority of retired diplomatic, intelligence, and military officials, including openly expressed doubt by that all too reassuring conforming group called the Council of Foreign Relations. That was pretty extraordinary, and they did speak up. But it was nowhere near the drum-beating crescendo of going to war. I've often pondered why is it that when presidents have served in the military, they tend to be more cautious than presidents who've never served in the military. And here we have this spectacle of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, and Richard Pearl, and a number of others, Condoleezza Rice, others, who never had military experience. In fact, the top two officials of our government were too busy getting exemptions and getting, in Bush's case, entry into the Texas Air National Guard to worry about a war that they supported, but they wanted others to fight it. And this also abstracts what war is like. War to George W. Bush is not something that I, like Eisenhower, experienced. Anybody who experienced real wars know the horror of it, the hell of it. After a while, you look around and you see the futility of it, the recklessness of it, the damage to innocents who pay the biggest price, civilians, death and injury and dislocation and dispossession. But to George W. Bush, it was all an abstraction. He turned himself into a messianic militarist, began talking about being the will of Providence, God's will, that he feels that he was chosen to deal with replacing Saddam Hussein. And you know, when you look at displacing Saddam Hussein, and these kinds of religiously connected statements, which were printed in our press, and must have caught the attention of some people in the Islamic world who wondered, especially after he used the word crusade, whether this had a tinge of religious war against Islam. At any rate, now we're in Iraq, and the question is how to get out of it. And there is a very compelling reason to ask ourselves, how do we give Iraqis back their country with an internationally supervised election so they can have a democratic government, not a puppet regime, and not inflict upon them what they now think is inflicted upon them, a permanent military and corporate occupation, oil company occupation of their country. The Pentagon is planning the construction of 14 military bases. You usually don't do that unless you think you're going to be around for quite a long time. And so the Iraqis are looking forward not to a light at the end of the tunnel. They're looking forward to the entrenchment of a puppet government, laying out contracts so that private foreign corporations get an iron grip on the main resource of the country, oil, and on other economic activities. If you look at Paul Bremer's 100 or so decrees, which haven't been sufficiently publicized, they essentially corporatize the economy, allow 100% ownership of many Iraqi assets by foreign companies, and extend Saddam Hussein's prohibition on the formation of trade unions. And the oil company workers resent that, of course, and there have been pro-trade union demonstrations where the workers have been arrested for fomenting civil disorder. So how do you get out of this? You have to give a deadline. And our proposal, which is on our website, votenader.org, in outline, certainly is a basis for discussion, is a 6-month corporate and military withdrawal phased with the entry of international peacekeepers, not as many troops as we have now, because that would signal the end of the occupation and take the bottom out of the insurgency. And international peacekeeping troops from Islamic countries or other neutral countries that are experienced in that activity, with internationally, not U.S. supervised elections, with a resurrection of the arrangement in the 1950s when the Kurds, Sunnis, and Shiites worked out a kind of autonomy within unity relationship before the era of dictators came upon them. So it's not like they're new to this situation. They have elders who command great respect. It's one of the advantages of tribal societies, in the sense that it's not just total anarchy there, although our troops are a magnet now for stateless terrorism and for a recruiting ground. The first rule in any policy against stateless terrorists is not to pursue policies that create more stateless terrorists. Continuation of humanitarian aid until they get on their feet. And I think that proposal has a far greater degree of success simply because it is extremely attractive to mainstream Iraqis who are tired of the war, tired of dictatorship, and see that they can get their country back. Right now you have shopkeepers in Baghdad by day and guerrillas by night. The same people. And to distance themselves from this kind of resistance requires their belief they're going to get their country back and not under a puppet regime. Otherwise, what we will see is what we see for any country that is occupied. Any area, whether it's Palestine or Texas, if they're occupied, they don't like it. And no one likes occupation, especially this kind of occupation, which includes economic control of their only asset, the third largest pool of oil in the world. And there's going to be more resistance, more sabotage, more death, more injury, more destruction. And that may spread beyond the borders. So that seems to be something we have to discussed during a presidential campaign. And unfortunately, given soundbite journalism, and given horse race journalism, and given the Me Too position of John Kerry, heeding his advisors who are telling him the best way to take the Iraq situation off the table is to be very much like Bush. To blur it, just like Bush blurred education with Leave No Child Behind, which is leaving a lot of children behind. And therefore, between the two major candidates, there's not much of a debate. There may be a debate over more troops or how much you lean on the UN, but basically, John Kerry has staked his position on statements like, the troops will start to decline at the end of his first term. 40,000 more troops need to be sent there. He said that months ago, and the like. In a broader context is that our country is just not equipped with sufficient civic interest and knowledge about foreign issues. I think the Pentagon had something like 78 fully fluent Arabic speakers in its entire realm before 9/11. And until this year, foreign affairs were hardly a blimp on the presidential campaign screen. Now, of course, it's a major issue. The only place where democracy comes before work is in the dictionary. And presidential candidates have to stop flattering the voters, because if you flatter voters who are otherwise preoccupied, you render them susceptible to being fooled or flummoxed. I don't know which is worse. It goes from flattery to being fooled and flummoxed for millions and millions of voters who refuse to exert the level of diligence to become informed voters as they exert to become sports fans. As sports fans, they know the record of teams, they know the statistics of the players, they completely disregard the rhetoric of the players, contrary to political candidates. They know how to ascribe responsibility in a rather sophisticated manner to the players, the umpires, the coaches, the managers, and the owners. And they keep up to date and do their homework. Now, if those kind of traits could be transferred to their role as voters, we'd be in a lot better shape in this country. So this candidacy is not going to flatter the voters. And we're going to engage in tough love. We're going to hold them to higher standards. We're going to demand that they do their homework, because flattery in the mouths of politicians is like anemia in the bloodstream of human beings. And when they are voters, they basically can follow these political charlatans or these political cowards or these political cautious individuals who don't have the steadfastness of following up publicly what they privately believe they should do. And there's a big difference between what is the private judgment of people in our Congress and what publicly they do and say on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, for example. And that issue is integral to conflicts in that area of the world. It seems rather logical if the United States government was interested in settling that conflict, the first people they would connect with is the broad and deep Israeli peace movement and their counterparts on the Palestinian side who have been working together with one another to work out and that is not happening. No matter that you have thousands of people who are formerly in the Israeli military and now in the reserves being peace advocates, including the famous Refuseniks, who on their website, seruv.org.il,